So while we wait, and before I introduce Glen, how many of you are new to Tushita Center? First time here? A very warm welcome to you. Thank you very much. It's very heartening to see so many people here after the hiatus of COVID. So thank you. Tushita has been established in Delhi since 1979 or so. And we even have a former director here, or co-director, Joya Roy, she's here. And the center has had many incarnations in different parts of Delhi, but we've been here for 25 years or so. Our director isn't here to tell you more about our history. She's in the States right now, but I'm sure she would welcome you all very much. What we plan here, what we are doing here is trying to fulfill the aspirations of our teachers. Lama Yeshe, our founder, whose photo is there on the left on the wall, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, whose photo is, well, behind the screen and probably in some other places. So their vision was to provide a place where people can really understand what His Holiness Dalai Lama now calls the Nalanda tradition, which is basically a very vast spectrum of Buddhist teachings that were taught at Nalanda, preserved immaculately in Tibet, and now transmitted back to India and the West since His Holiness left in 1959. So we're one of the many centers worldwide, about 150 centers maybe, which are trying to preserve this Mahayana tradition. And so here we're a very small center. We're not like our big sister in Tushita, Dharamsala. There's a chair here if you want to come and sit. But we do have regular meditations and occasional one-day courses. And we're very fortunate to sometimes be able to host very qualified teachers like Glen Svensson, who's you taught here many times.
A few now.
And because I'm a bit rushed today, I didn't do my proper homework on your biography. So you were born in Scandinavia.
No, Australia.
No, wrong? Australia.
Australia.
But your surname is from
Sweden.
Sweden. Okay, Sweden. And I don't know what you studied at university. You probably studied something. IT. Okay. But what makes him special for us is that he came in touch with the Tibetan teachers, how many years ago, roughly?
27.
27 years ago. So, yeah, older than some of the people here, perhaps. So anyway, what I appreciate about Glen is he's so clear. He's clear, and he's not only clear as a teacher, he's dedicated to the art of teaching and using all the methods that make it clearer for people and more understandable, but he practices, he's a practitioner. He's taken teachings from some of the highest, really greatest teachers of this age. And, has done does regular retreats, meditation retreats, and is planning to do most of next year in Australia in retreat. So that shows someone who, is kind of dedicated to the practice and not just talking about it, which is very inspiring. So we're very grateful to Glen for coming here to share his insights. And this is one of the topics he excels in, emptiness. So I hope you will benefit from that. Maybe Glen will talk for an hour and a half or so.
Well, and we have a break in the middle.
A little break in the middle to catch our breath and so forth.
And a meditation as well. And a meditation on emptiness.
And then a meditation on emptiness and some Q&A
at the end. Yeah, time for Q&A at the end. Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully that will satisfy us for some time and give us food for thought and meditation for a long time. So again, I formally thank you very much, Glen, for coming, and would like to request you to turn the wheel of the Dharma. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's a spare chair up front.
Yeah.
2 spare chairs. In case we need one.
I'd like to welcome everyone here to Tushita Delhi and welcome to this talk this evening titled Insight into Emptiness. So let's have a look at what we'll be covering here this evening. First, we'll give a little introduction to this topic, and then we'll introduce this view of emptiness. And then we'll look at how we are currently stuck in what's called self-grasping, and then how to overcome that self-grasping, how to overcome it through this Vipassana practice of emptiness. And so we'll look at how to do this meditation on emptiness. And then we'll take a short break in the middle. And then straight after the break, we'll go into a meditation on emptiness. And then after that, two topics. One is how to find the middle way, because we often fall to one of two extremes in this practice. And then also at the end, just a brief look at how we can use the idea of impermanence as a doorway into this emptiness practice, because this emptiness is very profound, not easy to understand, and impermanence can really give us a little nice doorway into this practice. And then, as Kabir said, we'll have time for question and answer at the end of the session. So first we'll start with this classic quote from the Heart Sutra that's very well known. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form also is not other than emptiness. So let's have a look at what that really means. We'll unpack that in the coming slides. And so here, this Heart Sutra is part of the teachings of the Buddha, which are called the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, or in Sanskrit, the Prajna Paramita. And these teachings of the Buddha are really building on the foundation of the Four Noble Truths. Four Noble Truths is a foundation of all Buddhist traditions. And in these teachings, it was really highlighted that the fundamental ignorance, the fundamental problem, why we're stuck in suffering, is this grasping to self. And that how we see the world is not really a problem. But here in the Perfection of Wisdom teachings, the Buddha went on to say, well, actually, also how we see the world is a problem. That there appears to be an independent, objective world out there. But if we examine that closely, we'll come to see the world does not exist as it appears. And there is no independent, objective world out there. And so here in the Prajna Paramita teachings, the fundamental ignorance that is causing us all of our suffering is this grasping to an independent me and grasping to an independent, objective world. How to overcome that through the Vipassana or wisdom practice is to come to realize nothing exists independently. This is the idea of emptiness that we're going to introduce and talk about this evening. And so it's on the basis of realizing this emptiness that we can achieve full awakening, we can achieve enlightenment. And this idea that the world does not really exist as it appears is also something that now is very well understood in modern physics, particularly in quantum physics. So here I have a quote from probably one of the greatest theoretical physicists of the 20th century, John Wheeler, who says, useful as it is under everyday circumstances to say that the world exists out there, independent of us, that view can no longer be upheld. There is a strange sense in which this is a participatory universe. And then a quote from a very well-known quantum physicist, Anton Zeilinger, who's had a lot of discussions with His Holiness Dalai Lama on this topic of emptiness, and they seem to share a very common view. And he says, one may be tempted to assume that whenever we ask questions of nature, of the world there outside, there is reality existing independently of what can be said about it. We will now claim that such a position is void of any meaning. It is obvious that any property or feature of reality out there can only be based on information we receive. There cannot be any statement whatsoever about the world or about reality that is not based on such information. It therefore follows that the concept of a reality without at least the ability in principle to make statements about it, to obtain information about its features, is devoid of any possibility of confirmation or proof. This implies that the distinction between information, that is knowledge, and reality is devoid of any meaning. What he said in that last sentence is very close to this view of emptiness. And in his discussions with His Holiness Dalai Lama, the Anton Zeilinger is amazed at how Buddhists can come to realize reality as understood by quantum physics simply by meditating. And the Dalai Lama is amazed at how a quantum physicist can basically come to the view of emptiness through running experiments, physical experiments. So they have a very close understanding of the view of reality. Let's introduce this view of emptiness. So now there really seems to be an independent me here and an independent objective world out there. And to describe this word independent existence, a number of terms in the Buddhist texts are used. One very common term used is inherent existence. And inherent existence means the idea that things are self-existent. Each one having its own unique identity. Another word that is commonly used is existing from its own side. And that things are simply existing there without the need of an observer. They're already existing from their own side. We just come along and confirm that existence. And another term that's commonly used is true existence. Now for us, something is true if it doesn't deceive us. Now things appear independent of us. If that's really how they existed, they would be true. Meaning the way in which they appear and the way in which they exist would match. So that's what true existence means. True existence means existing in the same way in which it appears. So these are three terms used to describe independent existence. And so the assertion here in the view of emptiness is that nothing exists inherently. Nothing exists from its own side. Nothing has true existence. And the reasoning is that things are not independently existent because they are dependently existent. And so that's described as things are empty of inherent existence. So empty of inherent existence means not independently existent because they are dependently existent. And the term used here is dependent arisings. Things are dependent arisings. They come into existence dependently. So here then, this term emptiness is coming from the Sanskrit term shunyata. And emptiness is simply things are empty of inherent existence. And the etymology of the Sanskrit term shunyata, shunya means zero, hollow, or empty, and means ness. So actually emptiness is a very good translation of the original Sanskrit term shunyata. So emptiness doesn't mean nothing really exists. Emptiness simply means nothing exists independently, inherently. Why? Because they exist dependently. So if we can better understand what it means for things to exist dependently, we can have a better understanding of emptiness. So let's now have a look at how things exist dependently. And we can talk about things existing dependently in three ways. That things exist depending on causes and conditions, things exist depending on their parts, and things exist depending on labeling, or another word for that is imputation, designation, or conception. So let's have a look at each one of those three to understand what we mean by them. So causes and conditions. Things come into existence through causes and conditions. So here we can talk about substantial cause and cooperative conditions. So substantial cause is the thing which transforms into the result, and the cooperative conditions are all the necessary things to make that transformation possible. So let's look at two examples to understand those 2 points, those two things. Simple example first, the sprout, the plant. What is the substantial cause of the plant is the seed from which it came. But for that seed to transform into the plant, we need lots of conditions. We need soil, sunlight, water, and so forth. But also it can be mental things like the farmer's desire to make lots of money, maybe he put fertilizer and that helped the transformation. Another example, a mental example, anger. What is the cause of anger? And the substantial cause of our anger is the seed of anger in our mind. That's what manifested as anger. But for that transformation to take place, we need lots of conditions, maybe an annoying person or something that irritates us, and lots of other factors as well. And it's often here where we mistake cause for condition, because often when we get angry, often don't we say, that person made me angry. They're the cause of my anger. No, they're not. Impossible. They are conditioned, but the cause of your anger is the seed of anger in your mind. They are contributing condition for that anger to manifest. So we need to be clear between cause, substantial cause, and condition. Parts. We also say that everything exists depending on its parts. Again, using the example of the plant. The plant exists depending on its parts. Because without the root, the stem, the branches, and the leaves, there is no plant. So the plant exists depending on its parts. These two ideas, not too difficult to understand. The plant exists depending on the seed and the conditions. Yeah, depends on the plants. However, I think for many of us here, we can happily accept that the plant exists depending on seed and conditions and exists depending on its parts. Yet at the same time, we can happily accept that there's a plant existing there objectively, that existing from its own side. Is that true? Yes. Yes. But that should be impossible, because either the plant exists dependently or independently. It can't be both. So why is it that we can happily accept the plant exists depending on causes, conditions, and it exists depending on its parts, yet there is a plant existing there objectively from its own side? Why can we seemingly accept those two contradictory ideas? The reason is because we don't understand causes and conditions and parts at the deepest level. We only understand them very superficially. To understand them at a deeper level, we have to go to the third way in which things are dependent. That is, that things exist depending on labeling, designation, conception, and so forth. But then you say, well, I know what that means. Labeling means there's a thing there, I'm calling it a plant. Again, it's a very superficial understanding. Let's have a look at what labeling means at the deepest level. World, we receive a mass of sense data, particularly visual data. And to make sense or meaning out of all of this data we receive, what we do is we draw lines around various collections of data and create meaningful objects. And we do more than that because we need to communicate with others. So we have to give names to the things that we've created so we can communicate. So labeling is this process of drawing a line, creating an object, and giving it a name. How we do that is not fixed. It's completely arbitrary, depending on the meaning we want to get out of what we perceive. For example, how many things are here? How many things are there? Most often, we would probably draw one line around all of that data, create one object, and call it a star. But on other occasions, it may be more meaningful to draw two lines, create two objects, and say there's two triangles there. On another occasion, more meaningful to draw 6 lines, say there's 6 triangles there. Another occasion, maybe we draw 7 lines and say there's a hexagon and 6 triangles. On another occasion, maybe more meaningful to say there's a collection of 18 lines there. So is there 1, 2, 6, 7, or 18 objects there? How many things are there? We decide how many things are there, meaning there is no star to be found there in the basis. The only star that exists is the one we've created in our conceptual mind. That's what merely labeled means, that things only exist in our conceptual framework, because that's the only star that exists. one that we've created in our conceptual mind. There is no star to be found there in the basis. So there's another term we often see here, not findable. There is no star to be found there in the basis, because again, the only star that exists is the one we've created in our conceptual mind. Based on that understanding of labeling, let's go back now to look at causes and conditions of parts and try to understand them a little bit more deeply. So here we have a timeline in our seed and sprout example from before. So we said the seed is the cause of the sprout. But we believe things exist objectively, independent of us. If that's the case, there must be a fixed, obvious point at where the seed becomes the plant. So at what point here does the seed become the plant? At what point? And when we look at this closely, we can understand the point at where the seed becomes the plant is the point at where this configuration of data stops looking like our concept of seed and starts looking like our concept of plant. And we all have slightly different ideas of what it means to be a seed and what it means to be a plant. So for some of us, the point at where the seed becomes a plant is way back here. For some of us, it's here. Some of us, it's here. We decide when the seed becomes the plant. Here's another question. If two things are in a cause and effect relationship, and seed and plant are, by definition, they cannot exist at the same time. So here's the question. Does the seed stop existing before the plant comes into existence? So again, does the seed stop existing before the plant comes into existence? There can only be two answers, yes or no. Which is it? Most people say no. But if you say no, it means the seed is existing at the same time as the plant. Illogical. It cannot be no, because they're in a cause and effect relationship. So the only other option is yes. But then if you say yes, the seed has ceased to exist, where is the plant coming from? Yes is illogical. Both no and yes are illogical, which means our idea of causality based on things existing objectively, independently, becomes illogical. It cannot work. It cannot function. Not possible. And so here, this are the sort of questions that Nagarjuna, who I had on the front slide of this talk, in his Mula Madhyamika Karika text, his famous text on the middle way, he says, you believe in independent existence? What about seed and plant? How does that work? Fire and fuel, agent and action. How does that work? And he throws out all these arguments and we go, well, actually, none of these things work based on independent existence. They become completely illogical. Another question. We say that the sprout exists depending on the seed. But here, this view of emptiness is also saying the seed exists depending on the sprout. How does a seed exist depending on the sprout? And the answer is not that the sprout produces more seeds. That's not the answer. How does a seed depend on the sprout to exist? The answer is that you can only call something a seed if you have the idea plant. Otherwise, what does seed mean? It has no meaning. Whether or not it produces a plant, irrelevant. So that's cause and conditions. What about parts? We'll use a pen here for the example. So we say that the pen exists depending on its parts. But can the pen be found here in the basis? Can you actually find the pen there objectively in the basis? So if we start pulling it apart, then we'll see that this bit is not a pen, this bit is not a pen, and then you end up with no pen. But then people say, oh, that's easy. The answer is the pen is the collection of the parts. Well, there's a collection of the parts over there. Oh, no. It has to be in a certain shape. So when does the pen come into existence? And if we start assembling those bits, none of which is a pen, we start assembling them, at what point does the pen come into existence? The point at where the pen comes into existence is the point at which that configuration of data closely enough resembles our concept of pen. And our concepts usually have at least two parts, appearance and functionality. So when that collection appears to closely enough resemble our way of what it means to be a pen, and it seems to function according to our idea of pen, then there's a pen. So there is no pen to be found objectively there in the basis. Because if there is a pen there objectively in that basis, it would mean that if a caveman came in here, they'd pick it up and start writing with it. But maybe a caveman came in here, they'd pick it up and go, weapon, some sort of weapon. And then if a dog came in here, they may see some sort of chewing stick to chew on. And if a tiny ant came up to it, they may see some sort of home to live in. So is it a pen, a weapon, a chewing stick, or a home? From the side of the object, none of those things. From the side of the observer, all of those things. So the pen is not the collection of the parts. The pen is merely labeled depending on the collection of the parts. And if we can understand that those two statements are not saying the same thing, we're beginning to understand something about emptiness. So again, the two statements are, the pen is the collection of the parts versus the pen is merely labeled depending on the collection of the parts. But also here we say the pen depends on the parts, but here we can say the part depends on the pen. Same reasoning as before. You can only call something part of a pen if you have the idea pen. Whether or not the pen exists is irrelevant. This process of drawing lines and creating objects, meaningful objects, and giving names is necessary. If we don't do that, we could not function, because all there would be a mass of meaningless data. We wouldn't know, couldn't function. No chance. That's not a problem. We must do that. The problem is we don't realize that's what we're doing. The problem is it seems like the world is already divided up into many separate, discrete things as soon as we come along. But what's the problem with that, you might ask? What's the problem with seeing the world is already divided up into many separate things? The problem is if we see something and we have a pleasant experience, thinking that it exists objectively, we'll naturally assume that's the cause of my pleasant experience. I want that attachment. Or if we're having an unpleasant experience when we see something, together with the mistaken belief it exists there objectively independent of us, we'll naturally assume that's the cause of my unpleasant experience, aversion. So with this false view, we end up with attachment to pleasant, aversion to unpleasant, and then the whole mess starts from there. And that leads to lots more mental afflictions and a lot of suffering. In most of our experiences, the very first line we draw is we draw a line around here and we create the experiencer. Because in single experience, there are two aspects, experiencer, experienced. We need to distinguish those two aspects, otherwise no sense or meaning. And I think a newborn baby can't even do that. They can't distinguish themselves from what they experience. They have to learn to do that. So again, we must do that. But the problem is we don't realize we do that. It seems like there's already an independent me here. And so what we do is, as soon as we draw the line and create me, and we give it a name, experiencer, subject, me, person, whatever label we apply to experiencer part, then as soon as we do that, we grasp, we contract around the me part of experience, we split ourselves off from what we experience. We see ourselves as independent of everything we experience. And so again, the problem with that is exactly as I mentioned. We see ourselves as independent of everything we experience. We see something pleasant, that seems to be the cause of my happiness, attachment. See something unpleasant, that really seems to be the cause of my suffering, aversion, anger, hatred, and so forth. And the whole mess starts from there. But this self-grasping, this grasping onto an independent me that seems to be here, is completely illogical. Because we can ask the question, is this big, this pen, is it big? We can't say, because big only exists dependent on small. Like that, up exists depending on down, in exists depending on out. In the same way, me only exists depending on not me. Subject, object, experiencer, experienced. So self-grasping, grasping onto an independent me, believing there's an independent me here, is like saying, this is big. It's completely illogical. It doesn't make any sense. And it's completely out of sync with the interdependent nature of reality. And in most of our experiences, this self-grasping is quite strong, because we often have this sense, me saying this, me doing that, me going there, me, with strong self-grasping. The more self-grasping, the more we are splitting ourselves off from our world of experience, the more we are out of sync with the interdependent nature of reality. So in fact, what we are doing is we are fighting against the interdependent nature of reality. And when we fight against reality, we have mental afflictions and we suffer. The stronger the self-grasping, the more likely we have mental afflictions and suffering. But sometimes in our behavior, this self-grasping is not as strong. And that often happens when we're more focused on the activity rather than the agent. For example, when we're absorbed in reading a good book, absorbed in watching an interesting program on TV, absorbed in solving a problem at work. On those occasions, we are more focused on the activity. So the self-grasping is less. And we know from our own experience on those occasions, time seems to go quite quickly. Things seem to flow quite well. Why? Because we're more in harmony with the interdependent nature of reality. We're not fighting against it because the self-grasping is less now. And this is very much emphasized in people who have developed a high level of focus in their activity. For example, professional musicians, professional athletes who spent thousands of hours of training in their activity and have developed a high level of focus. So much so that when they're doing that activity, they often report they're in the zone or the flow state. So much so that they often say, well, actually, there was no sense of me. There was just the music playing. There was just the activity happening. Not only that, but on those occasions, they report peak performance, optimum performance. Why? Because we're more in sync with the interdependent nature of reality. But this is only through focus. So through focus, we can temporarily reduce the grasping a little bit. Here, in Vipassana practice, this wisdom practice of emptiness, we are coming to realize emptiness. We are coming to realize there's not one single boundary in the entire universe. Because now, once we draw those lines and create the me, we create our objects of experience. We turn those lines into boundaries, hard boundaries. There's some me here, a cup there, a laptop there, person there. Everything seems to exist objectively independently. So we've just turned lines into boundaries. But if we realize emptiness, we'll realize there's not one single boundary in the entire universe. And if we realize that, then naturally and spontaneously from that experience, we will have boundless love and compassion for everyone. Now, our love and compassion for others, quite biased. Suffering in this body? Oh yes, a lot of compassion. I care a lot about suffering in this body. That body over there, maybe friend, yeah, okay, maybe I'll help them. That person there, I don't know, no, nothing to do with me. That person there, no way. In fact, I hope they suffer because I don't like them. So so now with grasping, self-grasping, there's me and them. Problem here, yes, I care about that. Problem there, nothing to do with me. Not really. I don't really care. But if we realize emptiness, we will experientially see after that, if suffering is arising in this body, that body, equal. Suffering is arising in a body, the spontaneous response is compassion. Whether it's this body, that body, doesn't matter, equal, all equal. So this is actually one sign that our emptiness practice is going well. If we're doing this Vipassana practice of emptiness, and we think we're having some sort of experiences, but then as a result of that, we are becoming more distant from everyone, more disconnected from the world, then I would suggest our emptiness practice has gone horribly astray, horribly astray. One sign that an emptiness practice is going in the right direction is you should notice you are feeling closer to people, you should have more love and compassion for others. That's a sign emptiness practice is going in a good direction. Now, it's important that we don't just gain some intellectual understanding of emptiness, because merely gaining intellectual understanding of emptiness is not really going to help. And we know this from our own experience, is that our behavior is not driven by intellectual understanding. Our behavior is driven by instinctive habits. And so if we want to benefit from this emptiness, we need to make it experiential. Because actually, we could be the smartest scholar of emptiness on the entire planet and be completely miserable, with a lot of mental afflictions and suffering. So if we really want to benefit, we need to bring intellectual to experiential. But then people go, well, okay, then I don't need to study. Let's just meditate. Tell me how to meditate on emptiness. Because that study sounds like a lot of hard work and I probably won't understand it anyway. So I just want to meditate. That's not going to work either. Because if the intellectual understanding is a framework for practice. So if we don't study, we try to meditate. There's a Tibetan saying is that meditating without studying is like trying to climb a mountain without hands and feet. Doesn't work very well. So if we really want to do this or any meditation, we need to first have an intellectual understanding of what the practice is and what it's about. Otherwise, what are we doing? And if we have some experience, how do we interpret that? We've got no idea. We could be just completely spacing out. So it's important to get an understanding first. So we need to study. So we need to understand what emptiness means, because often people who don't just hear the word and they go, oh, emptiness, that just means nothing really exists, doesn't it? So nothing really exists, nothing matters. I can do whatever I want then. This is completely wrong understanding of emptiness. And we're going to look at that after the break, this idea of finding the middle way. Because one of the big problems here with this emptiness is we feel like emptiness means, well, nothing really exists. So I can do whatever I want. But that's absolutely wrong understanding. And we'll look at how to correct that after the break. But first, then, okay, if we want to benefit from this idea of emptiness, we need to, from intellectual to experiential. How do we meditate on emptiness? And very often it's recommended in the meditation texts that we start by investigating me, the person, because that's where we start to go wrong. When we have experience, first line we draw, here, me, then grasp, and then grasp. So this is where we start to go wrong, and here's something very familiar with us. So it's recommended we investigate the me here. Now the me that seems to be here really does seem to exist objectively from its own side. There seems to really be a me here. But if there is a me here existing objectively, we must be able to find it. And so one way to investigate is here, as from this book I recommend on emptiness practice from Dalai Lama called How to See Yourself as You Really Are. He says there are 4 major steps toward realizing that you do not exist in the way you think you do. And the first step is what's called identifying the target. And that is to come to really see, how do I see myself existing? Just get a clear picture of this me that seems to be here, this me we're grasping onto very clearly, because that's what we're going to look for. If we don't get that clear picture of the me that seems to be here, and then we do the search, it'll be inconclusive. It would be me like asking you, is a particular person in a crowded room without you knowing what they look like? I say, look for John, but you're not really sure what he looks like. Well, you could look all day and you go, well, maybe that's him, I don't know. So similarly, if we get a clear picture of this me that we're grasping to here, then we look. Then we can, if we look and we don't find, where we know that me is nowhere to be found here. So that's the first step. The second step here, called limiting possibilities, is just knowing, where do we need to look for this me? Where could this me possibly be? The me that seems to be existing objectively can only be in one of two places. Either the me is the same as the body and the mind, or it's different than the body and the mind. If it's in neither of those two places, it's nowhere to be found. It cannot exist. I mean, the only real place it might be would be the same as the body and the mind. Because if the me was different than the body and the mind, it would mean we could have a sense of me over there somewhere. We never have a sense of me that's not somehow connected with some aspect of the body and the mind. But to be complete, we need to look in both places. So then we look, and this is the third one. Is the me the same as the body and mind? Can we find the me in the body? Can we find the me in the mind? If we can't find the me that seems to be here, then the only place it could be is different than the body and the mind, which would mean we must be able to take away this body and the mind and be left with the me. And if we search in those two places and we don't find it, that not finding is an experience of emptiness. But it's not merely not finding, it's actually realizing it's not findable anywhere. And so if we get to that point in the search of not finding, then we rest in that experience of not finding, because this is an experience of emptiness. Now, and we'll do this meditation after the break, but just a couple of points on that is, there is three common experiences when we first do this practice. One common experience is we sit down and we're following the instructions. We're sort of looking, we're trying to find, but we're confused, not sure, I didn't see, I don't really know. And that's really symptomatic that we don't have a serviceable mind. It's a little bit like if a scientist wants to run an experiment using some equipment, then the scientist better have functioning equipment. Because if the equipment's not working properly, they could run the experiment 10 times and get 10 different results. Similarly, we could run this experiment 10 times with not a functioning equipment of the mind and get 10 different results. So therefore, if we want to run this experiment well, we need functioning equipment. What does that mean? Means we need a calm, clear, and focused mind. Because without, then we're not going to be able to search well. We'll get distracted, we won't see clearly, it won't be conclusive. So that's why you find that shamatha practice is the basis of vipassana practice. So all Buddhist traditions emphasize vipassana practice, because without this insight practice of emptiness, we're not going to overcome mental afflictions and suffering. And so people go, okay, I need to put a lot of effort in here then. And they put a lot of effort and they don't get anywhere. And then you go, well, have you done any shamatha practice? Oh, no. I'm just doing vipassana practice. Well, then you could be like a scientist, run the experiment 100 times, not get anywhere. So if we really want this practice to be effective, we need to work on the shamatha practice. We need to cultivate a very calm, clear, focused mind. Because then when we do the investigation, we won't get distracted, we'll be able to look clearly, and we will come to a conclusion. Because now running this experiment would be Again, you know, let's say you're looking for this person, John, and you know what they look like, but your eyesight's poor. And I tell you, look in the room for John, but you've got very poor eyesight. And you go, I can't, no, I don't know. So again, poor eyesight, no shamatha. Shamatha practice is like putting glasses on or putting contacts in, go, looking very clearly. Oh yeah, there he is. Easy, easy. That's one experience. Another common experience is we sit down to do this practice, and then our intellectual mind goes, I know the answer, I know the answer, I know who I am. You don't need to look. And usually it's based on some sort of belief system that we have. And maybe if we come from a Christian background, our intellectual mind goes, well, I'm just really the soul, because that's what goes to heaven and hell. Or if we've studied a bit of Buddhism and we've heard something like subtle mental continuum goes from life to life, intellectual mind goes, don't need to look, I know the answer, I'm subtle mental continuum, I know that. Or if we've studied some more new age philosophy, which says everything in the universe is subtle vibration, subtle energy, then my intellectual mind goes, don't need to look, I know the answer, I'm subtle energy, I'm subtle vibration. Easy. Then we're not being an empirical scientist. We're just accepting our belief system, which may or may not be accurate. And even if it is accurate, even if we have the right Buddhist answer, it's not going to help, because we're trying to bring intellectual to experiential. We're not just trying to have more good ideas, intellectual ideas. So in this meditation, leave the intellectual mind out, belief system, leave it aside. Be a true empirical scientist and just look through your direct observation and see what you see. That's second experience. Third experience that's common is we do this practice and then a lot of fear arises, particularly existential fear. And it feels like either I don't exist or I'm going out of existence. If we have this experience in this meditation, very good. It means you're doing the investigation well, and you're really coming to see the me is nowhere to be found. But what's happening is you're misinterpreting that experience to mean no me at all, and existential fear arises. But again, as we're going to see after the meditation, after the break, this fear is irrational, because the only thing going out of existence is a false sense of me, the one you've been grasping onto your entire life that's caused you so much mental afflictions and suffering. That's the only thing going out of existence, self-grasping mind. So if we understand that, we actually will have a lot of joy when we don't find this me. So that's a few common experiences. And that's what we're going to do in this meditation. But I think that's all I wanted to cover before the break. So let's take a short 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and do this meditation.
Thank you. There are two bathrooms, one just where you came in on the main door, and another upstairs. Okay. So please take this break. We don't want it to be too long. That is the meditation time. So yeah.
10 minutes. 10 minutes. 10-minute break.
Swedish minutes.
Swiss. 10 Swiss minutes. They're precise. Vipassana practice. So remember, Vipassana is the Sanskrit term and Vipassana is the Pali term. The VI prefix means higher, superior. Passana or Passana means to see. So Vipassana or Vipassana means higher seeing, seeing beyond. So usually Vipassana or Vipassana is translated into English as either insight or special insight. And so here in the Mahayana, when we do Vipassana practice, then we are doing this practice of emptiness. So let's do that practice now. If you'd like to find a nice, comfortable posture. allowing your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them into space. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest. To come to rest in the present moment. And simply become aware of the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Now, do you have a sense that there is a me here who is meditating? A me who is trying to relax the body, and a me who's trying to focus on the breath. A me that seems to exist from its own side. A me that seems to exist objectively. Do you have this experience of being me, the meditator? If there really is a me existing here objectively, we must be able to find it. Can the me who's meditating here be found anywhere within the body? So search thoroughly every part of your body and look for the me who's meditating. Is the me who's meditating here somewhere inside the head? Maybe somewhere behind the eyes? Look closely. Is the brain, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the brain simply something which me, the meditator, is using? Is the whole body itself, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the whole body itself simply something which me, the meditator, is trying to relax? Well, can the meditator be found anywhere within the mind? Again, search thoroughly every part of the mind and look for the me who's meditating. Is the whole mind itself, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the whole mind itself simply something which me, the meditator, is using to focus on the breath? Is the combination of the body and the mind, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the combination of the body and the mind simply a collection of two things which me, the meditator, possesses? Two things which me, the meditator, is trying to train. Yet, other than the body and the mind, what else is there here? if there's nothing more than the body and the mind here, then where is the me who is relaxing this body? And where is the me who's focusing this mind? Where is me, the meditator? If you can't find that me, simply rest in the experience of not finding, knowing it's nowhere to be found. And even if you didn't find that me who's meditating here, isn't there someone who's experiencing all of this? So there is a me here meditating. But how can this me exist if we don't seem to be able to find it? The me exists as something merely labeled on the basis of the body that is sitting here and the mind that is focusing on the breath. It's the merely labeled me who's sitting here meditating. And so simply rest in this experience of this dependent me, the me that doesn't exist as it appears to exist, like an illusion. And we can bring the meditation to a close. And as we saw before the break, 3 common experiences that we have in this practice. And again, if we're having this sort of existential fear, again, it's usually a good sign. It means we are doing the practice well, and we're coming to see there's no me to be found anywhere, but we're misinterpreting that experience to mean no me at all. And how we really overcome that, we'll look at very shortly. But to basically just understand the only me that's going out of existence is the me that we've falsely grasped to our entire life, the one that's caused us all of our mental afflictions and suffering. If we realize that, we'd be very happy about realizing that me does not exist. And again, if we find that we're doing this and we can't investigate very well, we're confused, don't see very clearly, that's a sign we need to do more of this shamatha practice to cultivate a more calm, clear, focused mind. And then again, if we don't allow the intellectual mind to come in and go, I know the answer, you don't need to look, I know the answer, just give the intellectual mind a holiday. We want to be an empirical scientist and see what we see through direct observation. Now we are stuck in what's called the two extremes. Because for us now, there really only seems to be two possibilities. Either there is a real objective me here and a real objective world out there, or there's no me and no world. Because the only world that has appeared to exist is the one that seems to exist objectively. The only me that has appeared to exist is the one that exists objectively. And so if we investigate and we don't get to find that, we think, well, then that means there's no me and no world. And so now we are stuck in this extreme of existence, grasping to everything existing independently. But when we investigate this supposed independent me and supposed independent worlds through this Vipassana practice of emptiness, and we investigate and we don't really find anything, then we misinterpret that to mean, well, there's no me at all, there's no world at all. And we simply flip to the other extreme of non-existence or nihilism. And so to overcome that nihilism is to understand things, I exist, the world exists, everything is a dependent arising, to reaffirm that. And to know if we're stuck in these two extremes, then often people say things like, well, if things function, if they work, they can't be empty. And if things are empty, they can't function, they couldn't function, they don't exist. If this is how our thinking is, then we're stuck in the two extremes. The real understanding of emptiness, i.e. the middle way between the two extremes, is to understand because things function, they must be empty. And because things are empty, they can function. That's the correct understanding of emptiness. Because if this cup had a unique nature from its own side of being a cup, if it existed objectively as a cup, it means it couldn't change. You couldn't create it, you couldn't destroy it, it couldn't function. But because it has no unique nature from its own side of being a cup, therefore you can create it, you can destroy it, it can function. This is the correct understanding of emptiness. Now, there is reality, there is a me, there is a world. But what we do is what's called superimpose, we put something on top of reality. So cup exists. What we're putting on top of the reality of cup is we're superimposing that this cup exists objectively. We put that on top of the cup. That cup exists objectively. So what we're trying to do in this emptiness practice is strip away what we've stuck on top of reality without stripping away reality itself and left with nothing. So the saying here is, we want to throw out the bathwater without throwing out the baby. We throw out the baby with the bathwater, we end up with nothing. So when we're stripping away what we've put on top of the cup, if we strip away there's a cup, we end up with nothing. We end up in nihilism. And so here, this is the quote we had at the start on the first slide of this talk this evening from Nagarjuna, who's really the founder of what's called the Madhyamika philosophical system, which is this philosophical system which really unpacks this teaching on emptiness from the Buddha in a very precise way. And he says, that which arises dependently and relatedly is explained as being empty. And that which is empty is dependently designated. This is the middle way path. This is the middle way. Meaning emptiness and functioning world, which appear now to be contradictory. Either there seems to be a functioning world out there, a real one, or if things are empty, then nothing really exists. So they seem to be contradictory now, but the real correct understanding is they're like two sides of a coin. That because things are empty, there can be a functioning world. And because there is a functioning world out there, that it must be empty. That is the correct understanding. That is the middle way between these two extremes of existence and non-existence. And this view of emptiness is very difficult to understand. I mean, it's very easy to mouth the words, you know, very easy to say, oh yeah, everything's empty, everything exists, nothing exists objectively, blah, blah, blah. You know, I hear people saying that all the time, Buddhist people, and yet I still hear them say, oh, it doesn't matter because everything's empty. I mean, this is completely the wrong understanding. That's nihilism. The real understanding is because things are empty, everything matters. That's the correct understanding. And to really help us to understand emptiness, a lot of analogies are used to describe it. The one that I really find very helpful is the analogy of a dream. Now, when we're dreaming, in the dream, there really appears to be an independent dream me here, and there really appears to be an independent dream world out there. And so in the dream, if we see something pleasant, we end up with attachment. If we see something unpleasant, aversion, fear, anxiety. But in the dream, if suddenly we realize we're dreaming, i.e. we become lucid in the dream, and we realize this is a dream, there still will appear to be an independent me here. There'll still appear to be an independent dream world out there. But now, because we're lucid, we will know directly that these dream appearances are deceiving us. There is no dream world out there. This dream world is a product of my mind, which means if we meet something pleasant in a lucid dream, it would be difficult to have attachment. And if we see something unpleasant in a lucid dream, it would be difficult to have aversion, and we would enjoy the dream a lot more. So this view of emptiness is saying our waking life is like a dream, meaning that now in our waking life, there seems to be a me here, independent. There seems to be an independent objective world out there. And when we meet something pleasant, it seems like that's the cause of my happiness. We have attachment. We see something unpleasant. That seems to be the cause of my suffering, aversion. But if we become lucid in the waking state by realizing emptiness, then there'll still appear to be an independent me here. There'll still appear to be an independent world out there. But because we've realized emptiness now, we will directly realize these appearances are deceiving us. Things do not exist as they appear, because we've realized that's the case, which means then, having realized emptiness, something pleasant appears in our life, hard to have attachment. Something unpleasant happens, hard to have aversion, and we would enjoy the waking life a lot more. So I really find the analogy of a dream very helpful in better understanding emptiness, but also understanding what are the implications of the view of emptiness if we make it experiential. Again, if we leave it as just intellectual understanding, even if we have a very good intellectual understanding of emptiness, I would suggest nothing's going to really change in your life. You're still going to have attachment to pleasant things, aversion to unpleasant things. You're still going to suffer as a consequence. Because again, our behavior is not driven by intellectual understanding. It's driven by instinctive habits. If we want to overcome those instinctive habits, that instinctive grasping, the instinctive attachment, the instinctive aversion, we need to make that intellectual, experiential. Once we come to experience emptiness, get a little taste of it, that's going to start to have a little bit of an effect in our life. And the deeper the experience, the more positive effect it will have in our life. But then we say, well, okay, if I can't find the me here, how do I exist then? How do I exist if I can't find the me? So again, we'll go back to the example of the pen. It's always good here to start with a physical object because it's easier, and then we can move to person. So what we said earlier was, now it seems like the pen is the collection of the parts. what we're saying here is the pen is not the collection of the parts. Because if it was the collection of the parts, it would mean a dog would see a pen, an ant would see a pen, a caveman would see a pen. But the pen is merely labeled depending on the collection of the parts, or the chewing stick is merely labeled for the dog and depends on the same parts, or the weapon is merely labeled depending on the same parts for the caveman, and so on. So similarly, now we think I've got water. I've got it. Get there. Now the person seems to be the body and the mind. Me, I am the body and the mind. But just like the pen is not the collection of the parts, the me is not the collection of the body and the mind. The me is something merely labeled depending on the body and the mind. And in Buddhism, this is called the mere I. The mere I is the I that is merely labeled, the one that exists without a conceptual framework. This is the dependent me, the me that exists, the me that functions. But then people ask, well, but who or what goes through this life? And who or what goes to the next life? And technically, we would have to say nothing goes through time. Because superficially, it seems like this cup is moving through time. But if we look closely here, there's no static cup. There's just constant change. So actually, there's no static thing moving through time, is there? There's just a flow of change in the physical world. And to make sense of that flow, we draw lines, we create objects like cup to make sense of the flow. Fine. But if we grasp onto that cup as it's some sort of static, unchanging thing, then we're out of sync with reality. There is no such cup. Similarly, in the mental sphere, it seems like our mind is moving through time, but there's just a continuum of mental experience. And in that continuum of mental experience, constantly changing, we label mind, just like a continuum of physical change here that we label body. And the me is something merely labeled on this flow of physical change called the body, the flow of mental experience called the mind. So where is that me moving through time? There's none. Just like there's no cup moving through time. But if we understand that, we could say it's the mere I that goes through this life and on to the next life. But only understanding that the mere I is simply a label we're constantly applying to this constantly changing physical body and constantly changing mind. That is the mere I going through time. And on that note, and this is the last presentation, and we can take some Q&A, impermanence can be so helpful in understanding emptiness, because this idea of emptiness is not easy to understand, not easy. But impermanence is something that's a little bit easier for us to get our head around, because it's been conclusively proven in modern physics. And we often hear this presentation that impermanence means things are changing moment by moment. Good, good. However, we don't want to grasp onto that, because if we say there is a thing existing in the present moment and then in the next moment it becomes a different thing, then if there is a thing existing in the present moment, then that present moment has a duration of time, maybe very brief, but there's duration of time. And if there is a thing existing in the present moment, objectively, it would mean during that brief moment of time, it's not changing, which means it's not impermanent. And if it didn't change during that brief moment of time, how could it change? It couldn't. So impermanence is just constant flow of change. And in that constant flow of change, then we have these concepts like things existing in the present moment. But if we grasp onto those concepts and think they exist objectively, then impermanence doesn't work. It can't work, because then you have an objective thing there during a brief moment of time and it's not changing. Impossible. So therefore, you can't point to something objectively in the present moment, because as soon as you can, it's not changing. So you can cut that brief moment down in half, go down, down, down at infinity. You will never be able to point to a thing in the present moment. That is the understanding of impermanence. That is actually so close to understanding emptiness, so close. If we really understand that about impermanence, we are this close to realize, or understanding at least, emptiness. To understand that there's this constant flow of change. And so if we can come in through impermanence, not only understanding impermanence, but meditating on impermanence, come to experience impermanence, then I think you'll find it's going to be a good door into emptiness practice. Because then you're less likely to flip into the extreme of nihilism in your emptiness practice, because you'll understand actually there is a flow there. It's not like nothing there, nothing exists. That's all I wanted to mention. We've got plenty of time now for Q&A, so anyone has any questions?
There's two clarifications regarding the meditation. One is the self exists.
The
Self exists.
hang on, before you go on. He said the self exists.
But
I need to clarify first. Here in Vipassana practice, we have to be very careful when we use the word self. When we talk about like compassion and so forth, we talk about compassion for self and others. There, the word self just means me versus others. Here in Vipassana practice, usually when we see the word self, it doesn't have that simple meaning. It usually means an overinflated false sense of me. So here in Vipassana practice, self does not exist. In other contexts, we use the word self just to mean me exists. But here in Vipassana, normally when we see the word self, it means a grasping to an autonomous me or inherently existent me and so forth. I just wanted to clarify that.
yeah,
Go on.
so
person exists.
me exists,
Yeah,
but me doesn't exist inherently.
correct. That's what we're
Okay,
saying.
Or the self or the I, whatever the word is really used.
Right.
Now, when we are really doing the emptiness of the self, which is really from the mind, there has to be generic image of the self.
When we search for the self, or
Yeah.
well, yeah,
Searching.
yeah, that was the first point. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is that generic image of the mind which we really visualize as self, which we are really trying to understand? Yeah.
So we are searching for the me that we are identifying with, the one we're grasping onto.
Okay.
And in any given situations, that grasping will be on maybe a different basis. Like, you know, if we say, oh, I'm in pain, maybe there's some pain in the knee, then we are labeling me on the basis of the knee, and we're grasping onto that me. Another time, you might say, oh, I'm angry. Then me is labeled on anger as part of the mind, and we're grasping to that I. So it's always, the me is always labeled on the basis of the body and the mind, but depending on the situation, the basis can change a lot. But it's the me that we're grasping to, that's what we need to be looking for. And we need to have a clear picture.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is that as a beginner, I mean, we do strong grasping, but we never look at that. We're always grasping, but looking outwards. You know, it's strong grasping, but we're not so familiar with it because we're outward focused. So often they say as a beginner in this emptiness practice is just sit there and think of a situation where there was a strong sense of me. Like, for example, someone criticizing you for something you never did. Or sometimes in the text they say, imagine you're on the edge of a cliff and someone comes up behind you and gives you a little nudge. Then and then just when that sense of me appears, just rest in that experience, because that's the me we're identifying with in our behavior. That's the me we need to look for, not some intellectual idea of who we think we are, because that's often where people go astray. They start looking for who they think they are, but that's of no interest here. The me we're looking for is the me we're grasping to instinctively, not who we think we are. Because if we do that, we're just doing some sort of intellectual exercise, which is not this practice. Yeah.
The shamatha has to precede the vipassana.
If the vipassana work wants to go well.
Exactly. So what is the level of the shamatha which is enough for really doing the meditation?
Yeah.
Because otherwise the level of the shamatha is really very high.
Yeah. So the question is, I mentioned earlier that to really be able to practice shamatha, vipassana, this emptiness practice, or any vipassana practice for that matter, we need a calm, clear, and focused mind. And we achieve that through what's called shamatha practice, concentration practice. And those of you who are more in Theravada background probably never heard the word shamatha. In Theravada, it's called jhana practice, just developing single-pointed concentration. So the question is, well, how good does that have to be to start vipassana practice? So what we need to realize is, like, it's not like I have to fully develop shamatha, then I'd go to vipassana, because otherwise we'll never start vipassana. But what it means is that if we don't at least achieve some stability and clarity of mind, then our vipassana practice will be doing a lot of effort for very little, if any, progress. So we may need to emphasize shama at the beginning point, but it's not like we have to reach some very high level before we start vipassana practice. Because actually, without starting vipassana practice, you won't reach that very high level. Because vipassana practice, once it starts to have a little bit of an effect, it will sort of start to subdue the mental afflictions a little bit, which means your shamatha practice is going to go better. So, but now if our mind is completely distracted, like after about 2 seconds, or we're half asleep all the time, then vipassana practice really, I mean, we're not going to go anywhere. So emphasize shamatha, put more emphasis in that. And as you start to develop that, then start to bring in a bit of vipassana, because that's going to start to help that. And it's going to go, so they'll start to work like this. And they say you have to unify them. So it's not like shamatha, then vipassana, like this. But yes, we have to have some sort of basis in shamatha. And unfortunately, I mean, all Buddhist traditions say, all Theravada, Mahayana, all say the same thing. 3 core practice: ethics, concentration, wisdom, or ethics, shamatha, vipassana. But you go and look at what people are practicing nowadays. A lot of vipassana, and in Tibetan Buddhism, a lot of deity yoga, bodhicitta, and emptiness. What happened to the shamatha? Sort of gets left out. And people wonder why their vipassana practice is not going anywhere. They wonder why their bodhicitta is not developing. They wonder why emptiness is not going anywhere. Deity yoga not doing anything. Shamatha. I mean, shamatha is really the basis of all other practices. So it's very important. Maybe I'll check. There's also online here. Maybe there's some question online in the chat. Yeah. Okay. I'll take a Zoom question here. How does one come? Well, actually, I'll get someone who's. Oh, okay. Who was first there? I can't see who's the name. Who's at the top there?
Yuvika brother. Yuvika brother.
Okay. Yep, she can unmute and
Hi.
ask.
Yes, hi. I actually had a question about meditating using the Waking Up app. The Waking Up app is by Sam Harris, and he had learned from the best. He learned from Mingyu Rinpoche's father, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche. And in that app, we are doing a lot of meditations on emptiness. So he tries to turn consciousness onto itself, and we try and look at who the subject is that is
Right.
observing.
Right.
When I do that, I see no one. And which is why I've been finding it a little hard to stay out of nihilism.
Right.
And I understand in theory the concept of flow and impermanence, but I'm trying to find a better way to observe that, because I find that nothingness is easier to observe than flow.
Right. Yeah. So the question is, she's talking about getting some emptiness practice where they were guiding them to actually look in on the mind. So here in this talk tonight, we sort of did the more classic approach you find, particularly in the Guluk school of Tibetan Buddhism, in the Lam Rim, where you start by investigating person. But I think she's mentioning, coming from the tradition she's following, coming from like Tulku Urgyen, Mingyu Rinpoche, this is more in the Kagyu tradition. And so they're in the Mahamudra practice. And so generally in Vipassana practice there, they don't emphasize so much focusing on person, but on the mind itself. So she was saying that the practice they were recommended was to turn awareness in on itself and look for the awareness or consciousness or mind. And she said she's not really finding anything, but that not finding is an experience of emptiness, of being not findable. But to avoid going to nihilism, well, you can ask the question, well, who's experiencing that? Because there's someone experiencing that, so there's not nihilism. So again, it's just really to have an understanding, a better understanding of that emptiness means functioning world. And then you'll find, instead of falling into sort of a nihilistic way, you just rest in that experience, realizing that consciousness, awareness, mind, whatever label you want to apply, is nowhere to be found. And yet there is awareness, because if there's no awareness, then there's no one having that experience. Does that sort of help?
Yes, while it helps, it also complicates it. But I hear you. I think I'm going to try using what you've just shared, and I'll give that a try. Thank you.
Rightio. Okay, so now I'll go back to the class. We'll alternate between the class and Zoom. So class next.
Thank you, Glen. I was just wondering about the dream analogy you're using.
Yeah.
I can see how it's helpful to see that from the ultimate analysis framework, you could see that being useful. But you also mentioned how accessing emptiness helps us understand the conventional also as very important. And I'm trying to figure out how the dreamlike analogy will help us access the importance of conventional suffering.
Right, right. Remember, dream is not an example, it's an analogy. So that's where often people go astray, because they all say we have another popular analogy here is the rope and the snake analogy. But people go, but, and then basically they're thinking of the analogy as an example. So an analogy is always something simple to understand something more profound. And so the analogy of the dream is simply to understand that it's easy to realize that things do not exist as they appear in a dream. Similarly here, that's the limit of the analogy. If we try and take more out of it, then the whole analogy falls down. So I wouldn't be trying to drag more out of that analogy than it's meant to be. So again, it's like dream like an illusion, like a dream, like an echo, all of these analogies here, the limit is simply to use a simple thing in our experience to show there are simple things, like a reflection in a mirror, things like that, that it's easy to understand things do not exist as they appear, and therefore apply that here. And that's sort of the limit of the analogy. Okay, we'll go next back to
Chat from the link, which we can do next.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, how does one use the knowledge of emptiness to lessen the suffering of seeing another in pain?
So how does the knowledge of emptiness?
How can we use that to lessen the suffering of seeing another in pain?
There's lessen the suffering we experience from seeing. So the question is, how can a knowledge of emptiness lessen our suffering when we see suffering in others? Well, again, if it's just knowledge, it probably won't. I mean, we have to turn knowledge into wisdom, experiential. And now, the reason we suffer, because when we see others suffering, is because we've made a target here, right here. We put a big target on our chest and say, hurt me, hurt me. Where's that? There is no target there. We've created one by grasping to self. If we can release that grasping, then we can be present with immense suffering and it won't overwhelm us. What will instead have happened, because now when we see a lot of suffering, grasping, oh, I don't like that, I don't like that. Oh. And that's coming from self-grasping. So if we can release that, it's like it goes straight through us. But does that mean we become sort of indifferent? No, absolutely not. The exact opposite. Now we're indifferent because it's too much for me. I'm going to run away from all this suffering. Whereas if we release that self-grasping, if we get rid of that target that we have created through grasping, if we can get rid of that, then we'll be fully present and the spontaneous response will be compassion. Compassion. That will be the spontaneous response to that situation. And so, I don't know where it comes from, but it's a really nice saying here, is that as we proceed on the path, particularly in proceeding on the path, as we're having deeper and deeper understanding, experience and realization of emptiness, then when we're faced with suffering, then the saying is, we'll feel it more and it'll bother us less. But again, it doesn't mean we're going to be blank. And it's like, because sometimes people feel that, you know, we realize emptiness and we'll be like this when we're faced with suffering. That's pathological. That's a sign we're falling into nihilism. That's not a good sign. The good sign is instead of reacting with aversion, we more respond with compassion. That's the good sign. Okay, back into the class. Yeah.
Can you please explain or talk more about how, because something is empty, it is functional?
So she wants to ask, she's asking, how to explain more, because things are empty, how it can function. So again, I think it really is helpful, again, using the idea of impermanence. You know, if this thing was static, I mean, how could you do, you couldn't change it, could you? If it was static, if it existed from its own side as this cup. But because it has no unique nature of being this cup from its own side, therefore, you can create it, you can destroy it, it can function, it can change. So I think here, the helpful, again, is impermanence or change. Because in change, again, if we really look at a very close level, change just means there's not, like we saw the slide before, it's not a thing now, a thing, and then the next moment it becomes another thing. It's just constant flow of change. So if we have a constant flow of change, then things are functioning, aren't they? Because there's a flow. Yeah. And in that constant flow, then you won't be able to point to anything objectively, can you? Because it's just constant flow. So there's nothing you can point to in the present moment and say, that's a thing. And so that's how emptiness means functionality, using impermanence as the vehicle.
What I'm not understanding is that for something to be functional, how is flowing? Like the cup can be functional.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact that, well, there's got to be flow involved because there's movement. I mean, we're tipping it, there's water coming out. And also, of course, if you go down to the atomic level, subatomic level, I mean, it's about 99.9999999% space, isn't it? And the rest is like not really solid at all, is it? And if you go down to quantum physics, things are fluxing in and out of existence all the time. I mean, in fact, in quantum physics, there's no location. You can objective location you can point to. So if you go down there, very helpful. In fact, I mentioned earlier that we had a slide from Anton Zeilinger, the quantum physicist, Austrian. He's had a lot of discussions with the Dalai Lama, and now the Dalai Lama is really encouraging his monks to study quantum physics to help them better understand emptiness. So, I think quantum physics can be also helpful here. Okay, back to, we've got someone else on Zoom. Who's next? I think there's lots of hands up here.
Tamsin Moir.
Tamsin, how are you doing, Tamsin?
Oh, really well.
Sorry?
Rajesh was next. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Tamsin, there was someone in front of you. You're next after that, Rajesh. Is Rajesh?
Yes,
Yes.
hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I studied so much about emptiness from many years. And I have, in the beginning, there was fear was coming, very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, the fear got like, I experienced like joy and happiness.
Right.
And when I think about how we suffer, all sentient beings,
Right.
then tears start from my eyes.
Tears, yeah. Good.
Yeah, tears. The tears comes from my eyes, like how we suffer, we create our own worlds or labeled by our own mind, and we believe in that, and then we react on the things.
Right.
And then I study like the mostly when I was walking in the street, I was thinking that things are like illusion.
Right.
And then like in believing that things are, every appearance is there, but there was no belief in my mind that they are not objectively there.
Right.
That moment is there is no emotions.
Right.
And then after I was continuing, I was doing so many prostration, purification, accumulation of merit, the understanding was getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got very strong sickness when I start to meditate on emptiness after this strong experience of emptiness. And then I just came out of experience from the emptiness. And then I got so much harm, like my breathing was tight, and then my stomach is holding someone.
Right.
And I don't know how to maintain the mind. Still, if I listened to your teaching after a long time, like emptiness, and that was refreshing myself. I stopped like for last 2-3 years meditating on emptiness due to my sickness.
Right.
And like when I still understand emptiness, my mind goes like becomes so calm, so peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
And but after some time, the harm comes more stronger on me.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what kind of harm, or maybe lung.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when we're sort of going deeper into practice, then it's important, particularly if we're diving into quite deep waters in terms of emptiness practice and so forth. I think it's important that we do that under the guidance of qualified teacher, because if we start jumping into these practices and they really start to have an effect on our mind, but if not doing them in a very controlled, balanced way, then they can have these strong side effects as well. So I think it's important to get some advice and guidance on these sorts of things from qualified teacher to help you guide through these things, because there, as you mentioned, with some of these practices, we can have a strong purification aspect, but also if we start to sort of go a little bit tight on these practices, push hard on these practices, that can also start to really unbalance the mind as well. So, and that can cause a lot of problems as well. You mentioned this word lung, and this is something very common, I find, particularly within Tibetan Buddhists who do a lot of meditation on shamatha, vipassana, and other practices, and who really start to get some experiences, but then they decide they need to push harder, and then they really get very tight and tense, and they often have a lot of mental imbalances, and also can have a lot of physical problems in the body as well because of that. So I think it's very important, again, to go under the guidance of a qualified teacher to make sure that we're not sort of going astray in our practice in that way. And then also, if certain obstacles come up, then the qualified teacher can help us more, guide us through those obstacles, and even often transform those obstacles into fuel for the spiritual path. So that's what I would recommend, is not to really go too far deep into these sorts of things if they're having these sorts of strong side effects in the practice.
Thank you so much. But
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
So at one point you say that our conception has two parts, appearance and functionality.
Concepts, well, at least two parts, yeah. Concepts. Well, appearance and functionality, concepts. Actually, we know things through double negation. We know this is a cup because it's not a not cup. And it's like when we're young and we're learning, like, if a mother's trying to teach a child some names of things and they've got a pet cat, and then the mother goes cat, 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 then the child will get some sort of concept, basic concept like cat, some lumpy thing with four things sticking down, maybe something like that. Next thing, she sees a table and goes cat, 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 because it's a lumpy thing with four things sticking down. Mother goes, no, table, table, table. So then she refines, the child refines the concept of cat. Yeah, lumpy thing, four things sticking, moving. Okay, that's not moving, not cat. Okay. Then a dog walks past, the pet dog, cat, cat, cat. No, dog, dog, dog. And then the child refines the concept even more. Lumpy thing, four things sticking down, moving with a long thing sticking out the back there. And then so it's constantly refining like that. So this is how we know things, through double negation, through it not being the opposite of what it's not. And so appearance, again, it's hard to describe positively exactly appearance of anything. If I told you, give me 100% positive description of the appearance of a cup, what does a cup look like? You could give like millions of words and still not be, but what you could say is it's not flat, it's not this, it's not that. And then from that, you develop what it is. So in that sense. Okay.
And also how it's used.
Exactly, and its usage as well. Okay, now back to Tamsin. And then
Thank
maybe the last
you.
question.
Hi, Glenn. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Tamsin.
I just had a very quick question, which was, I'm about to go on retreat, and
Great.
I'd love to take something to read on the subject of emptiness or connected to it. What would you recommend?
Well, the book I recommend as a beginner is the one I've mentioned in this talk, is the How to See Yourself as You Really Are from His Holiness Dalai Lama.
Got you.
If you want a little bit more, a sort of a technical background of that, Introduction to Emptiness from Guy Newland.
Mm-hmm.
If you want something a little bit like that, but a bit more, that's a little more academic approach, but very well written, clearly written, and a little bit more experiential, but also I find very helpful, is Realizing Emptiness by Gen Lam Rinpa.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Nice
Okay.
to see you again.
Okay, Tamsin, thank you. Maybe one last question, class, and then we've run out of time. Yeah.
Is either of emptiness or the knower, which in the context of this practice of emptiness, I believe is being referred to as the self, permanent.
So is either emptiness or the knower permanent? Okay. So here first we need to understand what we mean by permanent and impermanent. And actually the word in Tibetan is not permanent or impermanent, it's changing or unchanging. So normally in our everyday usage of the word permanent and impermanent, often for us, permanent means something that sort of lasts forever, or at least lasts a long time, and impermanent, something that doesn't last very long. But here, when we use the word permanent and impermanent, and literally the word in Tibetan is not that, it's changing and unchanging. So the terms permanent and impermanent are not telling us how long something lasts. It's simply telling us, is this thing changing from one moment to the next or not? If it is, it's impermanent. If it's not, it's permanent. There are things which are impermanent that last forever. For example, our mind, the continuum of our mind is impermanent, but lasts forever. And there are things that are permanent that last that long. And one example of permanent, i.e. unchanging, is emptiness, because emptiness is a negation. So any positive phenomenon is by nature impermanent. Any negation by nature is unchanging because it's a simple negation. So emptiness is a negation of inherent existence. And so often in the text, they say emptiness is like space. But when we use the word space in this context, we're not talking about this stuff we can see here. This is impermanent because we can see it with our eyes. When they use the word space in the context of emptiness, where they say it's like space, they're talking about what's called not uncompounded space, which that is defined as an absence of obstruction. So that's also a negation. So anything that is a negation is unchanging because it's a negation. And so emptiness is a negation of inherent existence. So therefore it's unchanging, or if you want to use the word permanent, you can use that word. Yeah. Okay.
And the knower?
The knower, well, again, the knower is just a label we can apply to awareness, the mind, person. I mean, it's just a label we apply, and it's a positive phenomenon, so therefore it's impermanent. What we need, one last point, then we really need to stop, is any of you who've studied a little bit in the Mahamudra Dzogchen tradition, then often they use this word awareness. And often they say, oh, it's neither permanent nor impermanent. But that word awareness they're using is not talking about the mind we have now. They're talking about the very subtle, clear light mind, which you can't really say much about because it's the source of everything. So we have to be a bit careful when we hear people throw words around like, oh, awareness is neither permanent nor impermanent. Well, when they say that, they're not talking about this awareness. This awareness is definitely impermanent. Definitely. Okay. Let's leave it there. So, yeah, I hope you got something out of this evening. Thank you for coming along. I think the recording of this will be made available, I guess. And I hope to see you all again sometime in the not too distant future again. So thank you for coming. And thank you everyone on Zoom for attending as well. Thank you very much.
Don't go away yet. Nivita and Namita, is Namita there anywhere also? Oh, she's gone up. Okay. So, somebody call her maybe?
I just asked her to stop the recording.
Oh, okay. Maybe she'll come now. So look, I want to thank you, Glenn. That was one of the clearest